Welcome to the podcast. If you'd be so kind, would you mind introducing yourself?
I am Shannon Wheeler, cartoonist.
And Shannon Wheeler, cartoonist, what would people know you from?
I started off drawing underground comics, newspaper comics for my college paper, and then started doing alternative comic books, and then eventually did a few graphic novels, some comic books, and then started doing cartoons with the New Yorker.
And of the cartoons and graphic novels that you've done, one in particular stands out as you sip from your coffee mug. I have to say that I'm most familiar with your work for Too Much Coffee Man.
Yeah, that's definitely the most popular comic that I've done is Too Much Coffee Man.
So we will get to Too Much Coffee Man. I promise we won't dwell on it. But before we get there, you mentioned that you consider yourself a cartoonist. I'm curious. What is in your mind? What is the delineation between cartoonist, comic artist, and illustrator? Why do you consider yourself one, or do you consider yourself all
Um,
three?
no, I've done work illustrating, but cartoonist. I think it was either Wally. I think it was Wally Wood who said that a cartoonist is someone who can't write very well and can't draw very well. And I've always liked. I've, I appreciate that definition. Yeah, it's writing and drawing, and it's the combination of those two things where they go together when they complement each other. That it really is a little niche field. Being a cartoonist, it's real different than being an illustrator or a straight writer.
And as you mentioned, you've worked in both uh, single panel cartoons as well as multi-panel and multi-page comic books. Do you have a preference? Do you prefer one over the other?
No, single panels are in a way the easiest for me because it's just such a quick in and quick out. Where I'll really obsess over how panels transition to try to make a longer story, and just more work. But then at the end of it, the way that a long story comes together, all of a sudden it just the feeling of accomplishment on that is pretty profound. And the books too, like when I finish a book of and it has this little arc and story and characters and it all comes together, that's an amazing thing. So short answer is no. It's sort of whatever's in front of me I really enjoy doing.
Did you grow up reading comics?
hmm I as a kid I really liked all the boring, like Garfield was really my favorite. And then at some point, it was stumbling across my mom's underground comics. She had some Fat Freddy Cat comics, and all of a sudden, it was just like doing acid for the first time, and everything opened up. It was like, oh, this is what humor is. Because Garfield, the humor works very much by this predictability, where it has the same kind of little, happy birthday song every time, the same rhythm. Whereas Fat Freddy's Cat, it's you turn the page and it just takes a left turn that you just have never seen coming, and it was mind blowing to me. Um, Marvel comics I liked a lot, and then same thing where I found Robert Crumb and Gilbert Shelton and the underground comics, and it just changed a lot of how I thought about things. But yeah, I guess Mad Magazine, like everybody else, that's I got they when I did some cartoons for them, they gave me a hat. That Mad Bill Gaines and his sensibility, I think, like everybody affected me. So
Yeah, I think Mad is a very understated or underrecognized influence on a lot of the comedy that's popped up in the last 20, 30 years. Everything
oh,
from The Simpsons
absolutely.
to, Colbert to a lot of the Adult Swim kind of stuff. I think a lot of that mad kind of absurdity is sort of seeped through the culture.
Yeah, they hit. and so many different levels too, because you had the Sergio Aragonés stuff that was these little gags, and then you had the longer forms. Um, yeah, it was funny because I found a Dave Berg lighter side. I was at a convention and bought some originals. They were selling them. I found them for like $60 each. I was like, holy crap! I remember reading this strip, and so I bought as many as I could afford. And um, but yeah, I liked it. Dave Berg was a very staid, kind of middle class, boring cartoon, sort of like the Garfield of Mad Magazine, but a
Dave
great
Berg was the lighter
entry
side, right?
drug. What's that?
Dave Berg was the lighter side cartoons, right?
Yes,
The very
yes.
kind of like almost dad joke in 4 panels.
Oh, they're completely dad joke in 4 panel. Exactly. Yeah, really boring. But I loved them. I loved those. And then I was thinking about a cartoon about it was what you see in the movies versus real life, and it was about, I think it was like two people getting up in the morning, and in the movies it was they'd been out camping having an affair or something, and in the movies how beautiful and perfect everything is, and then in reality it talked about the bugs and they both looked terrible. And then it even talked about pregnancy, like where you have sex and in the movies you always get pregnant, but in reality, and it just blew my mind. I was like, holy crap, like everything I thought about life was wrong. Like this, it, it was hilarious. Like that was perfect, man.
At what point did you start drawing yourself? How old were you?
Um, I think it was when I started doing the comic book. I I was doing a comic strip, and then I was trying to figure out. I was selling these zines, and I did a zine to promote a little book collection of my newspaper strips, the college paper strips, and so I did Too Much Coffee Man, and then that just there was a local bookstore called Europa Books that started selling it, and the Too Much Coffee Man stuff started selling like crazy, like where I couldn't keep up. I was running them at the photocopy store, and I had a buddy there who was giving me color copies, so I could do the cover and then an 8-page interior, and I was stapling them and doing everything by hand. And I'd make a couple hundred at a time, and I just could. And so finally, I went to a printer, printed up 8,000 of them, stapled them all by hand, sold all of those, did another 12,000, a second print run, and so I knew that I was going to do a comic book, and I thought, okay, obviously I've got to do Too Much Coffee Man, so I need to break it into keep it interesting for me, because I can't just do sort of a superhero parody. That's why I broke it into 3 stories. So I had the cartoonist who's drawing the strip, a guy who's reading the strip, and then Too Much Coffee Man, the strip itself. So it was a deconstructivist swing at it, and that's when I really started doing autobiographical comics. And I did that in such a way because everybody was like Joe Matt was doing these comics, Nina Paley was doing autobiographical stuff, and everybody was drawing themselves as these more attractive versions of themselves. And I thought, okay, the emotions of drawing comics, like I feel like a bull in a china shop drawing comics, and so I just drew this big brute as but some of the stories later, when I draw myself, like I had a story where I hung out with John Lewis, and yeah, it's just you have to draw yourself at some point. But I try not to draw myself as cuter than I am in real life.
So, Too Much Coffee Man was essentially autobiographical.
I, a lot of yeah. I mean, there's autobiographical elements, but then in that, like things that look like they're autobiographical are actually me stealing from friends of mine, and then things that look like they're ridiculous are actual autobiographical bits. There's one where Too Much Coffee Man fights a squirrel, and that's real. I mean, I had a 3-month battle with this squirrel that was getting in my house. Um, Catching flies, there's a comic where Too Much Coffee Man, a fly can, it's how to catch flies, and you can swing your hand and catch a fly, and it sees your hand and it jumps. So you swing and grab a couple inches above the table, and you start to close your hand about a foot before you hit the fly. There's some little tricks to it, but that was a deadhead taught me how to. When I was in Greece, um, as a kid traveling, backpacking around, and I hung out with a deadhead for a month in Greece, and he taught me how to catch flies, and so that one's real. Um, yeah, it's all autobiographical, but um, hit and miss. I sort of couch it, hide it.
So I promise everyone who I talk to about this podcast that there will be a lot of technique talk. So I definitely
Mhm.
want to talk about how you approach the page. You work straight to ink, right? You don't do pencils first, or do you do
Um,
roughs?
I do roughs, and then what I found is I used to use blue pencil a lot, where I would kind of put the skeleton down and then ink, because that saves you the erasing. I was finding that erasing on inks, it was just really time consuming. A lot of times it would pick up some of the ink. So I used to use blue pencil. These days I've been using light tables, but the roughs are pretty rough when I'm inking myself. Um, I like the immediacy of trying to get as much, like being in the moment and seeing and just feeling what you're drawing. There's just the look and weirdness of ink straight to paper has an energy to it that I like a lot. So it's trying to figure out how to how to that sweet spot in between, like where you're not killing your pencils with inks. But the light table's been great because it just saves a lot of time and paper.
Yeah. Was it a hard transition to go to move to digital?
Thought about it, but there's something that I just love about inks, and I do draw it in digital, and I do coloring uh, digitally, and then I do all the layout digitally. So I'm not averse to it, but I love cross hatching. Um, I love the line, and what I said about how inking pencils, you don't want to kill that energy. And I just feel a lot of, at least for my stuff, it's like when I look at some digitally created comics, I just, it looks like it was created digitally. And it's like CGI, where I just feel like this technique is really going to date the era. It's not going to age well. And maybe that's absurd on my part to worry about that or think about that. But I even look at some of the old coloring that I did, and it's like, okay, the ink, the way that I colored that just looks very 90s.
Were you using Photoshop to color that old stuff?
Yeah, Photoshop 2.5 is what I started with.
For the cross hatching, do you use a nib?
Yeah, I used to use technical pens, and when I cartooned in Berkeley. I went to school in Berkeley, and cartooned for the Daily Californian. And then I moved to Texas, in Austin, Texas, and I was, the whole time I was working up to that, I was using technical pens. I was in architecture, and just I like the old Kohinoor technical pens. But then in Texas, I started hanging out with cartoonists who are much better than myself. Like there's um, who's there? Chris Ware, Robert Rodriguez, who's the movie director now. A guy named Tom King, who ended up animating on not The Simpsons, but the sci-fi Simpsons. And then who else? Man, I mean, it was Matt Madden. There's just a slew of cartoonists who are really good, and I thought I was good, and then I just had to up my game because I was like, man. So I switched from technical pens to using like a Hunt 108, which is a flexible nib, and I've had to move away from the 108s now because they're they're just crappy now. But there's some Japanese nibs that are still cheap that are coming. But you know, there's so much. A lot of the students that I've had, they love those. What are those dumb? Oh, what are
The
these?
microns?
Yeah, the microns, man. They just
Yeah.
love these things. But it lasts about a page. You know,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
draw and the ink runs out like nothing, and you buy yourself. Um, you know, you buy yourself. Where's that technical? Okay. Yeah, you buy yourself I mean, this is just, it looks fancy. It's just a nib holder, but you buy yourself a little nib,
Yeah.
and it's $1,
Yeah.
and it'll last you, you know, a week or something. And a bottle of ink, which is $10, and you draw a whole comic with a couple nibs and a bottle of ink. You know, so that'll, you know, you draw a whole comic, and it's maybe $10, $15. These microns, man, I just burn through them. The ink runs out like crazy.
Yeah.
So it would be about $100 for me to draw with these microns.
I think microns are only really they're a good option if you're constantly traveling. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
you don't want to worry about like pulling out like an ink a jar of ink on the bus or anything like that. But like I really prefer, you know, if I'm actually going to do some work at it, I prefer to just do it with a nib and a brush.
And
Um,
then yeah, I like these what are these guys? Just a Noodler pen. Um yeah, that's a pretty nice little, yeah, $20 for one of these. So it's still, you know, that's what, five microns is what that is. Um and then yeah, and then so I'll use like a Hunt 108 to get that to get the line, and I'll really lean into it because it's a flexible nib, and it has a lot of life to it, and I can get a really good a flow, you know, where it's just like thin to thick, and make it look kind of, I don't know, I just like the accidents that are happening with the blobbiness to it. And then I'll go back in with technical pens to do the cross hatching and doing all the like, I mean, the big influence on me, I really like Basil Wolverton, and which was the Mad Magazine, and just the way that he would sculpt a round shape, and form and get the reflected light, and it Crumb stole the half of his shtick from Wolverton, and I steal from both of them as much as I possibly can.
so I'd like to go back to something that you mentioned. You said that you were studying architecture.
Hmm.
Did you get your degree?
I did, yeah, yeah. But I would have been a terrible architect, so thank God I didn't.
Why is that?
Um, it- I don't know. I mean, I'd like to say that, but the thing with the architecture for me is that I felt that if you do it, you end up creating maybe 4 or 5 buildings in your life that are there. And with comics, you know, I just really like the idea of the immediacy of it, and the accessibility of it, where you're really talking to an audience and you're getting this feedback. And I like stories, and architecture is in a way it's very, very abstract because you're thinking about how people live, and you're working with to create space, and usability, and I like that realm. But the the therapy of doing a story, to me, is just really interesting. I just love narrative.
Now, did your training as a draftsman influence the way that you approach some of your page layouts?
Probably. One of the things that I liked, I had a lot of teachers that they like the way that they taught would say, here's a problem, and then they want you to think about the problem and solve it in the abstract before committing to doing anything. So you had a problem of, you want to design a stoa, like a Greek. That was a Greek term, fancy term for architectural space. So they want you to think about what a stoa is, what it means, what the space is, and then defining how to define the space and construct it. So if there's thoroughfares, how to deal with that. If there's usage thing, how to deal with usage. So that's influenced me, but it was really like cartooning at a place with Chris Ware, he's looking at a page and breaking it down and saying, okay, what are some weird little interesting things I can do on this page? And that's where my cartooning education came from, was just working with in the same vein as, or the same place as these other people that are like I said, just really top notch. And at the time too, I just thought, other cartoonist, not a big deal. And now in retrospect, it's like, oh, this is a world class, you know, world class cartooning. That no wonder they were light years ahead of me, because they're light years ahead of everybody.
So when did that first Too Much Coffee Man zine come out?
I want to say 91, 92.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that was an interesting time period, because you talked about Too Much Coffee Man as being autobiographical,
Hmm.
but it has elements of satire of the superhero industry that was exploding at the time. And even as a zine, a lot of that culture, just because I'm involved with the underground music scene, and so I know, like, there was an explosion of zines from all over the world, and people like trading tapes and all the stuff that was happening. um,
Yeah.
uh, when did you realize that the character was catching on, and that people were really enjoying, or really connecting to what you were doing?
Yeah, it was partly it was doing a newspaper strip, and I would meet people. So at the Daily Texan, they were running maybe 8 strips or 10 strips on a page, and I was one of those, and it was a real popular page. Cartooning was a thing, and I would go to parties, and people would, oh, what comic do you do? And I have the one with the talking dog in it. Oh, yeah, I think I know that one. And so, I thought, man, I got to sort of up my game and do something that's more iconic, and do something that has more of a hook to it. So I put together that book of, what are the Children with Glue. Um, yeah, Children with Glue, this one, and it collects a bunch of the newspaper strips that I'd done. And then I thought, okay, I got to do mini comics to promote it, because I thought if people buy a 25 cents or a dollar book, 75-cent book, they'll then come back and buy the $5 book. And so I did all these mini comics, and it was kind of like I threw a bunch of darts, and the Too Much Coffee Man dart was one that people just, it resonated with people. Um, and then I had the mini comics, and it's like the mini comics were just selling so much better than anything else I had done. And so I just thought, well, I can walk up a down staircase, or I can just do more Too Much Coffee Man. And I thought it was a one-off gag. And so doing another one, I was like, how do I do this? How do I keep it interesting? But it just kind of unfolded, where it tapped into something emotional within myself. It's like, oh, this is, for one, it's id, where impulses are acted on without constraints of super ego. And then it's also this intellectual, where he looks at problems and solves them, but he's also kind of an idiot. So that combination of being intellectual and idiot was something that really, um, is very autobiographical. So it tapped something within me that I didn't expect it to tap, and I don't think I could have kept doing the comic if, and even now, like, I do it when I want to and feel like it needs to be something real. I can't, like, oh, let's just crank out. There's another Spider-Man due. I'm going to do another Spider-Man story, invent the villain, and I, I'm always trying to figure out a way to break the pattern. That I like the, Fabulous Furry Freak Brother method of, like, hey, let's break down the formula that we've used and do something different each time. And it's, yeah, just to keep it interesting and real for me.
When did you move from self-publishing to working with Dark Horse?
98, um, I was putting together, I'd done a bunch of self-published comics, and I did a couple stories in Dark Horse Presents with Too Much Coffee Man. And I started putting together a book, and I just, yeah, I wanted to, I was trying to self-publish the book, but at that time, to go through a distributor, the way that distributors paid for books, if you're entering in the market, is that basically you put out a book, and then they wait till you put out a second book, and then they'll pay you for the first book. And so just financially, it was impossible. So I started reaching out to Dark Horse and saying, can you, would you be interested in publishing this book? And it's been a good relationship with them for a long time.
So, you know, a lot of the appeal of Too Much Coffee Man, or at least for me, is there's an everyman quality to him where almost anybody can relate to what he does. But I think the extent to which people have gravitated towards that character, and the way he's grown through different mediums, is actually quite surprising, to the point where you actually worked on an opera for Too Much Coffee Man. So how did that happen?
Yeah, it's that's a trip, because doing a cartoon was really difficult. Like, it got optioned by Comedy Central, and I was running with a animation company and trying to do this cartoon, and it was really difficult. Like, it was a little bit like turning, like Doonesbury has made a few failure cartoons, and it was sort of in that vein where somehow all the internal dialogue stuff did not translate to an animation medium. Like, animation really works well with physical humor and, um, kind of, this weird emotional stuff that you like, these tensions that, where Too Much Coffee Man a lot of times is conceptual and emotional on a different landscape. But then, yeah, doing the opera, it was, I was thinking about music and wanting to do Too Much Coffee. I had a dream where Too Much Coffee Man was singing, and I thought, oh, that'd be really fun, and that would translate really well into animation. And a friend of the family is a composer. He writes operas, and so he'd bugged me for years to do operas. And so after this dream, I woke up thinking, you know, man, if only I knew somebody who did music and I could team up and do some kind of musical thing. And I started running through the list, and I realized, like, oh, this guy had been bugging me for 2, 3 years to do this opera. And I'd been like, no, that's stupid. That's terrible. But then the dream, and I was like, oh, this is in my, like, this is right in front of me. So, um, yeah, it's just me being an idiot again and having this opportunity, and not really paying attention to it till, not appreciating it till, so I sent him a little, libretto. I'd written an ode to coffee on one of the coffee cups, and then he sent back a little piece of music, um, on a MIDI player, so it would play. And the way that he understood the humor of it, I was like, wow, this really works in a weird way. So I had Too Much Coffee Man singing, it was Love to Love. And so then in the way that he paused it, where it's like love, I love loving love. And it was just like repeating the word love so many times it became kind of an abstract and creates a rhythm and folds on itself in this way. And he put these pauses to make it work. And I was like, yeah, I'm all in. Like let's do this thing. Let's write this opera. Um, and yeah, just leaned into it.
Fantastic. And where was it shown?
It's been like I first produced it here in Portland, and then it's run in the Bay Area, Seattle, Albuquerque, played in New York once, or a little bit in New York. Where else? I think that's it. But it's been produced a number of times. So we've squeezed quite a bit of life out of this little lemon of a thing. Um, yeah, I mean, and what the other thing that really worked about it is that Too Much Coffee Man is so much about these internal feelings, like this exaggeration of um, stressing out about how to eat at a dinner table, or loving something and it doesn't love you back, and then pondering like, why am I not getting this thing that I want to get, this love or attention, and that's opera, like the opera is very much, you know, singing past the salt, or, I love this person and she doesn't love me back and I don't understand. And then here's this third person, and it's and it's all about each person singing their internal, like, here's what I am feeling, and I'm gonna have an aria about how much I hate my job. And it works. I mean, to me, it worked really, really well. I was shocked.
I mean, Too Much Coffee Man is such a melodramatic character that I can totally see him bursting into song, and having a monologue in song about a barista that he's in love with. So it works. It's in character.
I pulled
And
yeah.
if I'm not
Oh,
mistaken, you guys
go
actually
ahead.
beat
Sorry.
the Spider-Man. If I'm not mistaken, you guys actually beat the Spider-Man musical, right? By about 2 years.
Oh, yeah, yeah,
And nobody died
yeah,
making Too Much Coffee Man. So I think all in all, we could
yeah, and
say Too Much Coffee Man
it's a
beat
success.
Spider-Man.
I think, who else did an opera? But I think Too Much Coffee Man is the first opera based on a comic book. I know there's a ballet that was based on Crazy Cat in the 20s or 30s. And then Harvey Pekar, they did like a jazz opera based on Pekar, and I think Desert Peach at some point had an opera. But yeah, I think Too Much Coffee Man, though, I think we get the claim to the first dubious, dubious honor, but
Hey,
I'll take it though.
take it walking away. Sorry, you look like you wanted to say something else before I interrupted.
Oh no. Yeah, the other thing that I like about opera is that the characters are very much superheroes. Like the singing, when you see it in real life, it has a power to it that is just unreal. It does not translate well to um, a television screen, which is how we watch everything. And so, but in real life, it really is breathtaking to see these people with these superhuman powers singing these things.
I mean, I'm
I
trying to
gotta
think of.
say though that the first, like, I had done this, like, working on it and building up to it. Like at first, getting the broad strokes of the opera down was easy, and I pulled in a poet friend to help write all the rhymes and all that. Mostly rhyming couplets, and then yeah, getting the costumes together and doing all this, getting the money together to do. I mean, the whole thing took an obsessive compulsive energy to do it. And I was like, oh, this is really fun, this is great. And then I remember opening night, it had sold out, and the stage producer, she said, "Oh yeah, sit in the back, like go in the back." So I go to the back, and there are these risers because like all the chairs, and then in the back there's kind of so I'm sitting in the top, middle, back, and all these people are coming in, and all of a sudden there's hundreds of people sitting in this room, and I realized like I had done something really weird, and I'm watching all these people watch Too Much Coffee Man walk out on stage, and I realized this could possibly be the worst moment of my life. Like I might have made a mistake. Like this will be 2 hours of horror as I watch people be miserable, and it was just had a sinking feeling. And I, up to that point, I was just going along sort of blissfully, like, oh yeah, this is fun. I'll do this and pull this string and kind of solve this puzzle. And then when it was happening, it was weird. It was very, very weird.
Now, percentage-wise, if you had to guess, how many people were familiar with the comic beforehand, and how many people were just there on like date night or because it was something interesting happening at that theater?
About half. For opening night, it was because yeah, that was a question that we all were asking, and it was about half. And then Danny's music too is he likes some very traditional operas, but he works in these weird tensions where it goes atonal at a couple places very intentionally in order to create a tension, and then but to resolve it sometimes it'll be 2 or 3 minutes, and then it resolves into this really interesting nice harmony. But you don't there are places where you don't know if they've just really screwed up, and you're going to watch some kind of New York avant-garde theater for there's just tension sometimes, and then it resolves into this very into a nice Western harmony, and then you feel this relief. So he's working your emotions in this really roller coaster way that um, it's real opera. I mean, like we did not take uh, Rossini and then say, oh, let's put some Bugs Bunny words on top of the Barber Seville, and I got a haircut. I got a haircut. Like it's not shave the hair right off my head. It's we wrote an opera. Like this is a real. I mean, for better or worse, we threw our hat in the ring.
How long was the opera approximately? It was two acts,
Um,
right?
yeah, the first time we put it out, it was one act, and it was a little bit over an hour. And then I did a second act, trimmed the first act a little bit, and so the whole thing then clocked in at 2 hours. So the first act is all about Too Much Coffee Man falling in love with a barista, and then um, starts, and then Espresso Guy steps in, and then Too Much Coffee Man and Espresso Guy compete for her love, and she's just disaffected, and she's like, I don't want to be anybody's sidekick. I'm going to be my own hero, and so she leaves to be a superhero on her own because she doesn't need to. She doesn't need either of them really because they're creepy and weird. Then that was the first story arc. And then the second one, I have it be 10 years later where she'd gone off to Mars and married a Martian, and then Too Much Coffee Man dies and comes back. Um, and then and then we're talking about a third act. Danny put in for a grant, so if we get it, I'll be working on a third act. And I think that's where I'm going to have Too Much Coffee Man go to hell, which is basically going to be 2020 is what I can chronicle. Oh, yeah, Too Much Coffee Man in hell, 2020.
Well, speaking of hell, thank you for the segue. One of the actually that this ties into a couple of the books that you've done recently, but one of the books that you did recently was a collaboration with Mark Russell. A couple of books. One's called God is Disappointed in You, and the other is called Apocrypha Now. Tell me about these two books and why you decided to embark on this project.
Oh, those are great. I just loved working this so much. In my life, I've wanted to read the Bible for years, and then I was hanging out with Mark, and we were at a bar, and uh, I was asking him about Job because to me, Job is the dumbest story ever. Like it's God who basically tortures, his biggest devotee, and I and it's just it's absurd. It's like there's how do you sell a religion saying that your God is going to torture you? Like it just didn't make any sense. And it's like, why is this story relevant? It just seems like a story about, God being an a-hole. And and Mark, so we talked about this, and Mark was saying, well, it the best interpretation that he's read was one where it's not about God at all. It's really about man, and that we have an incomprehension of God, and you need to look at it purely from the point of view of man. That the God aspect of it and the bet that God makes with the devil is kind of irrelevant. It's about a personal struggle and blah blah. Anyway, we talked about this for 4 beers, and I'd liked Mark's writing. We'd hung out, before, and he'd done these stories about Superman. He'd done these other comics and short stories, and I was always just bugging him, and saying, "Hey, if you ever have a project that, like, let's do something together." But then talking about the Bible, I thought, here's a chance for me to read the Bible. Like I hadn't to that point read the Bible, and I've tried a few times. But I thought we could do the whole Bible, and it would be really interesting if Mark would write it up in short little chapters for each book. Then I could have a working understanding of this piece of literature. And he grew up Pentecostal, so he thought that rewriting the Bible in short bits would be easy. And so he said, sure. Of course, he was drunk like me, but then we started it, and we thought, like, yeah, this will be, I'll do these cartoons, and he'll rewrite the Bible into short bits. And so for me, it was a way to learn about this, to learn about the book, and it was great. I really liked it, and we took it real seriously, and we thought it was maybe a 2-month project, and then it turned into, I don't know, 2 or 3 years or something. We worked on it, but we really wanted to do justice to this piece of writing that's and we wanted it to be understandable, and I wanted to understand, like, okay, what is Hosea really about? And I want to understand what Hosea is, or Leviticus, or all these different books, because I think it's had a cultural, it's defined our culture in many ways, and I think it's important to understand these things.
Now, were you guys able to go all the way from Genesis to the Book of Revelations?
Yeah, yeah. We went through, the whole thing. And then some of them, at first, we were trying to do it where each book was reduced down to 4 paragraphs. But some of the books, like Genesis, it's sprawling, and it just moves through just a ton of characters. And then other books like Hosea is real short. And so then we kind of gave up some of the structural stuff and just started to feel like, okay, what does this need? And then but still trying to keep the whole thing so it clocks in at a digestible meal. Yeah, it was good. I mean, because what's funny is now I'm watching these dumb, the serial killer movies, and they're like, oh, he's writing, Euripides on the wall, and it's like some quote from, and they're like, oh yeah, I know that quote, I know what that's referencing, I know. Or when what the asshole that gets on the Supreme Court, Kavanaugh, and he's like quoting you know sow seeds in the wind, and you'll reap a whirlwind. I mean, basically it's a vengeance quote, completely asinine. But I know that yeah, it's like, oh, that's from Hosea, and his wife is cheating on him, and this is about having faith in God, kind of. But this quote is about vengeance. And I was like, yeah, that's not a good sign.
Mm. And you followed up God is disappointed in you with Apocrypha Now. Tell me about the stories in Apocrypha Now.
Apocrypha Now is kind of like the table scrap, like it's the bits that aren't in the Bible. So there was a Council of Nicaea, and they said, this is Bible, this is not Bible. And they said, burn everything not Bible. And so they figured out what the canon would be, because there's all this weird stuff that was written about the same time, using the same characters, like Jesus as a kid. And they said, this is weird, burn that. And the intellectuals at the time were like,
I
yeah,
like
we're
how I
gonna
like how even 2,000 years ago we had producers giving notes, right? Like
exactly.
this doesn't
we
follow
don't
the character arc, and I don't think the audience is going to follow it. Just take this
we
out of
don't
the
want
script.
that. We don't want Jesus as a kid in this Bible, because as a kid he was fallible, and he did things like kill his friends, and he took the mouth off his teacher's face. Like, he was sassing off to the teacher, and the teacher told him to shut up and sit down. So he takes the mouth off the teacher, so the teacher has no mouth. And it's just weird. It's very magical. It's very pagan, a lot of the stories. And so yeah, those, then they're dead. The Dead Sea Scrolls, they get hidden away and they get found later. And Apocrypha is, but it's like Jesus as a kid, and they're great. They're really weird and funny and interesting, and they add depth to it. And I think, like with the Jesus story, he starts off very fallible, and a lot of Christianity is saying, no, this is the Son of God. Jesus is divine, and that he's always been divine. And with the Apocrypha and some of those stories, it's like with the Jesus one, it's saying, no, he starts off as fallible, and he come learns to be godlike. And so it's more like the Buddha, and it's very Eastern in that sense, where it's one of essential, you slowly learn to be better. And so I can see why they'd want to burn it. But it was, yeah, it was interesting. In the Catholic Bible, there's Apocrypha, and it's some of those stories. They throw that in. Mark looks at it also as a lot of the stories, like if you go from Old Testament to New Testament, there's, I don't know, 500 years or 200 years. There's a gap in there, and some of these stories are filling in between Old and New Testament.
So from the Bible, you moved on to another extremely dense text, the Mueller Report. Tell me about tell me why you decided to tackle the Mueller Report. Why was this important to you?
It's kind of the same thing as the Bible, where it's like, here's something I want to understand. I don't understand this thing. I want to understand it. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to have a project that gives me the opportunity to learn what this is. And so that's why I got into it. And so yeah, again, like pulling in somebody who's smarter than myself, like pulling in Mark, who knows the Bible well, then all of a sudden it gave me an opportunity to learn the Bible. I wasn't raised religious, and to me, looking at a lot of the religious stuff is looking in a fishbowl. Like, it's interesting, but I don't have a hatred for it. I don't really have a love for it, but I do want to understand it. And same with the Mueller report, where I just wanted to understand this thing that I felt was culturally important, and I still do. And I feel like so many people were putting spin on it, as with the Bible. Like, people are saying the Mueller report is what's going to bring down Trump, or the Mueller report is completely irrelevant and is meaningless. And I just wanted to understand it myself and really see what was in there. So I pull in Steve Dean, who's a journalist and smarter than myself, and they're like, okay, let's work on this. Let's go through this one chapter at a time and see what it's about, and then try to explain it to other people and do kind of an even-handed, fair analysis of it.
And what was the biggest challenge in adapting the Mueller Report?
The biggest challenge is that it's kind of badly written. It's sort of a mess. It doesn't get interesting until the second book. Like all of a sudden, he broke it up into two parts, and then all of a sudden in the second part, you've got like Chris Christie coming in and having these weird conversations with Trump, and it's like, this is hilarious and amazing. Um, the the first part is like, okay, there's going to be a meeting with Trump's kids, a couple other people, and some Russians, and then does it go somewhere? Does it not go somewhere? You know, but it's sort of like a red herring in a way, because there's no there. It never. I think the significance of the Russian meeting was that there's an aspiration to be corrupt, and I think that's the clear takeaway. Is like, yeah, these Russians, they're kind of low level, and they're saying, hey, you know, like, drop these sanctions and we'll be able to get you elected. And they're saying, you know, what do you mean sanctions? And like, how do you, it was just, they were trying to make a deal, and neither of them, like the Trump people, weren't in a position to make that deal, and they didn't really understand the subtext of what was being offered and given. And then the Russians were too low level. It wasn't like Putin's, you know, right hand man. These are like third tier Russian people that they were just trying to up their position in the game, and they were like, oh, we've got this meeting with this long shot, like, let's set this up, and then we can go to Putin, and then eh, so. But they were trying on both sides. They were trying. It was like a bad date or something. They both wanted to get laid, but somehow, you know, there wasn't enough alcohol. But the second half with Christie and all this other stuff, it's hilarious. It's really interesting. And the corruption and the crimes are very, very clear. I wish Mueller had been a little bit less of a Boy Scout, because he defined his job early and said, this is what we're going to investigate. This is what we're not going to investigate. And I think if he had done a Watergate thing of follow the money, like, I think if he'd gotten into money, then he touched on it a number of times and said, this looks like there's a lot of criminality and deception in this money, but we're not. He kept saying, this is not our job to look into the finances. But I wanted to understand, like, yeah, I wanted to understand it, especially was being spun by Fox. And even now they say they always add on that term, the irrelevant Mueller report, or the deceptive Mueller report, or the pack of lies Mueller. I can't remember the exact, but they always, whenever they mention the Mueller report, they always attach a word to it that's very op-ed opinion, a very strong opinion piece to kind of. But I still think it's a pretty significant piece of. I thought this is the scandal of the century, like what Trump did. Um, you know, colluding with the Russians or whatever, trying to collude. All of his behavior, I thought, this is worse than, you know, this is the worst crap I've ever seen. You know, like, it was offensive and corrupt and bad. And then he had the Ukraine conversation with Zelensky, where he's extorting, you know, he's like telling this guy, basically offering him a deal and threatening him. And I thought, this is the worst thing ever. And then, like, every week, it's like the way that Trump put out fires is to light another fire. And so every week there's like, you know, oh, now we're having a Capitol insurrection. Like, what the hell? Like, it just, so yeah, the Mueller report kind of became less interesting compared to people storming the Capitol. But I think it's still real. I mean, to me, it really detailed out Trump's mechanisms of his methodology of threatening people, and just the crimes that he was committing. It really shows a lot of behavior that, and the people that he worked with, like Christie, are just despicable.
So I'd like to talk about the way you depicted Mueller and the way you depicted the former president. Let's start with Mueller because he's very often standing outside of the frame, narrating events, speaking to the reader. And I understand you had a very specific pop culture reference for that.
Yeah, I love the Dick Tracy stuff and the way I just felt like Trump and his crew were, mumbles and prune face, and it's just so it just fell into the Dick Tracy template really cleanly. And Mueller is just full on Dick Tracy of the way that they would set up a situation and then while they're working through it. And what's interesting is like some of my memories of Dick Tracy were actually memories of Fearless Fosdick and the parody of Dick Tracy, which I didn't, as I was getting into, but it does fit. I mean, like the weird, Dick Tracy and Mueller are so uptight and righteous and honorable and in a good way. Like I got to really respect Mueller, and it drove me a little crazy because, like I said, I wanted him to go after the money. I think there was a lot of money laundering and theft that was going on that if he had gone down those paths would have really shown, Watergate. Um, but like Dick Tracy is like, my job is to get mumbles, like I'm not going to go after whatever the other, you know, crime is. Um, but yeah, it was a good template.
As a character in the story, Mueller is very much like um, a gumshoe, hard-nosed kind of detective. But as the narrator of the book, there's something very Rod Serling about him, where he's presenting, imagine a world where none of the rules apply.
Yeah, I think it did. Um, that was the other thing that he did is he. I think he was really shocked by the behavior that he was seeing, and he felt like Rod Serling. I think many times where he's reading these report, like he's investigating into it, he's seeing the stuff that he's like, this is unreal. That there's this amount of illicit communication between like Stone and WikiLeaks. Like this is unreal what they were doing. It's dirty. It's cheating at poker. It's dirty pool. Like, and I think it really bothered him morally and shocked him in many ways. And you see that, like he's pretty humorless or he's very dry. And then, but when he's testifying in front of Congress and they're asking him, they're like, well, are they going to do it again? He broke, like he just started like I'd never seen him laugh. Um, I think I've seen him laugh like inside, like he has a lot of humor. But at that point, he was just so surprised that somebody would say that. He's like, they're doing it now. What do you mean? Are they going to do it again? Like he was like just shocked. And I think that was one of the mistakes he made is he thought that other people would be as offended as he was. And he thought, all I need to do, my job is to set up the pool table and rack the balls, and somebody else is going to knock them into like all the balls are now set up at all the pockets. Somebody just needs to run the table. Like that's my job's done. And um, yeah, I think that was, he was a little bit too optimistic in some ways, but he was Rod Serling. He did feel like this was unreal.
And in terms of depicting the former president, a lot of cartoonists will focus on his jowls or his pursed lips, and of course the hair. It's interesting to me that in the way that you drew him in the Mueller report, he really looks like a kid. He looks like a little kid who's swimming in this oversized suit and is kind of lost and flailing about and waving his arms around and doesn't really know what to do in any given situation. Was that
I
intentional?
started off, yeah, I started off drawing him as ugly as possible and sort of a Jabba the Hutt. And I was thinking, okay, this is who, he's Jabba the Hutt sending out Boba Fett to do, Cohen to do these bad things. Um, but then I thought, as I, it was really when I was doing that book of his tweets and reading them, I was like, wow, he's not a master planner. He's not Jabba the Hutt. He really is more straight id with no super ego. He's overindulged himself and doesn't restrain. And I think that's part of his appeal, is that he's id. And he's very charismatic to a lot of people. And part of it is he tells them, hey, you too can be id, indulge your vices, um, be you're smarter than the intellectuals, you're smarter than the scientists. If you see it snowing, why is there global warming if it's snowing? And that's that kind of logical thinking, um, is what he indulges in. And he tells other people, hey, you don't need to rein in your behavior. You don't need to drive a smaller car. Drive the bigger cars you want. It doesn't harm anything. And I think that's when he as a character started to make sense to me, where he is five on in a lot of ways. He wants to sleep with a porn star. He does it. He wants to, um, he's a kid in a candy shop. He goes into the White House.
He
He's like,
has
oh
two
yeah, I'm
scoops
going to
of
put
ice
the steak
cream
in the.
at every dinner.
Exactly. Yeah, that's right. And that is a child, in many ways. He didn't understand the gravitas and the responsibility of a situation, partly because I don't think that he has empathy for other people. And so that allows him to behave without repercussion. Or, I mean, there's repercussion, to feel like there's no repercussion. Like he'll say, yeah, do this thing, because he doesn't think about how he just doesn't care how it's going to affect, you know, yeah, we're going to have a healthcare plan. It's going to be better than the Democrat. What it is, I don't know. And he's lying. And he doesn't really care about the healthcare plan. All he cares about is undermining his enemies, what he perceives as enemies.
Now, did you hear from anybody who works in government or law enforcement after this was published? Did you get any feedback?
Not much, a little bit. People have said they liked it, and it was a good understanding of the book. So we've gotten some good feedback, but not. But it was just like the Mueller report. Like we got the thing out, and then there's another. All of a sudden, there's he's being impeached, and so that became the next obsessive thing. And then the Ukraine call, or first the Ukraine call, and then the impeachment, and then another. I mean, it was just like we're just putting out fires left and right. So not it didn't have the impact that I'd hoped it had, but yeah, I didn't know that there would be four, outrageous, like there would be four things more outrageous following. And man, who saw that Capitol attack coming? I mean, I still think we're processing as a country, and like I look back, it's like somebody sends a friend request and I look at their photos to see, sort of who they are, if they're interesting or whatever, if they're hot, like, so I'm going back through these photos, and it's interesting because on everybody's timeline, as you go back through their older photos, like, food eating, vacationing, with girlfriend or boyfriend, whatever bullshit things. And then capital attack, like it's marked everybody in the same way. Like we all have a little inoculation scar of the capital attack. And it's just, I think we're processing it still.
So the Mueller report was specifically about politicians and politics, but do you consider yourself a political cartoonist? Do you consider
No,
your work political? No.
I mean, it is incidentally and accidentally, and I'm interested in some of it. Um, Lately, I've been sort of annoyed. Like give me Bernie Sanders and I'm all in. And I'm interested in um, some of the, I guess, the social aspects of it. Like, it's interesting, like the Bernie brothers, that negative spin is a way to dismantle Bernie Sanders. Like, wow, they really figured out how to create a stereotype of Bernie brothers to undermine. Yeah, like they throw one pie at him of, he's a communist, he's a socialist, he's gonna tear down the American system. That doesn't quite stick, you know. It does with some, but then the Bernie brothers is another way, they another pie they threw. So I'm sort of interested in those mechanics of like what, um, or like calling the Mueller report, the irrelevant Mueller report, and always attaching a word to it to manipulate culture. I see politics as an aspect of culture, and I'm kind of interested in that in that angle. I do think it's important to call it there's just a lot of self-serving liars, in politics, and it's nice to, I don't know. Yeah, it pisses me off. So, but there are people that are really good at it, like Jack Oman, or somebody who really has this profound understanding of politics. I dabble.
So, speaking of politicians, in Memoirs of a Very Stable Genius, you relate a story about John Lewis. Uh, Actually, two meetings with John Lewis. Can you tell me a little bit about that story? Because John Lewis passed away about 6 months ago, and I think he's on a lot of people, or he was very recently on a lot of people's minds.
Yeah, yeah, nice guy, super nice guy. It was just, I guess the first March had come out about a year before, and I wind up at a party, uh, with the publisher, and so I'm standing next to him, and all of a sudden it's like me and John Lewis just standing there chatting, and I hadn't read his book yet. I didn't know that much about him. Now it just seems like, oh yeah, John Lewis, and we all know the Wikipedia page. But then I was just like, okay. And I knew he grew up in the country. I knew his civil rights. Um, and I was just looking for something to say to him. And I just thought, like, as a white guy, what can I say? And I was running through these different things, like, oh yeah, in Berkeley, growing up in Berkeley, we changed the name Grove Street to Martin Luther King Street. And then all the police started referring it to MLK, which is Milky Way, because it's Martin Luther King Jr. Way. And then they're calling it Milky Way. And then they got told not to. I was like, well, that's sort of a funny story about, I was like, but absolutely not appropriate. And then I wanted to ask him about, like, were they really recording Martin Luther King? Like, they have all these recordings of him having sex with white women. Like, no, that I can't ask him about that, although he probably knows something and it would be really interesting. But okay, that's off the table. So it's just like running through, what can I say that doesn't make me a complete asshole, right? Like, and I was coming up dry. And my grandmother grew up on a farm, and I thought, here's a commonality. Like, he grew up on a farm, my grandmother grew up on a farm. Maybe there's some common ground that I can kind of have with him. And my grandmother used to kill the chickens. So I started going on this long story about how she'd killed chickens. And he's just being polite and like, oh yeah, it's very nice, whatever. And so that night then, and the pizza came about then. And so I was, after me going on way too long about this horrible, stupid thing. So I'm reading his book that night. Like, oh, I should really read the graphic novel that my friends drew and my other friend wrote, and then talking to John Lewis. So I'm reading it. The first whole chapter is about his love of chickens, and I was just like, man. So, like, even if you disregard the subtext of my white grandmother killing chickens and then him being a poor black guy loving chickens, I mean, just if you let go of that, just like, if you let go of all the subtext, just on a pure level of, here I am talking about killing chickens to a guy that chickens inspired him to go into civil rights. Like he would protect the chickens when they died. He felt such a empathy. He would read from the Bible and give them little funerals, and he wouldn't eat chicken. It was just like, this is what made him go and understand how to protect other people. And here I am saying, yeah, just kill them. She just killed them left and right with nothing. It's just horrible. So anyway, that's a nice little John Lewis short story about being a complete idiot. And but he's so nice about it. Like there he is talking to me, and I talked to my buddy who's his assistant, and he goes, yeah, as stupid as you were, Lewis, he dealt with people that were much, much worse than you, where he'd be shaking somebody's hand who was a full-on Southern racist, and the guy saying, racism has ended. Look at us just standing here shaking each other's hands as if we're just equals. And that just means that everything's, and he said that Lewis dealt with that level of indignation and horror. And so I'm just like a speed bump on this. Like what I did was nothing compared to the embarrassment that other people have put forward. So it made me feel a lot better. But doing a comic strip too is a way to purge myself, and so that way I'm not like trying to get to sleep at night thinking about, like, now I commit it to page, and it's like, all right, I can at least go to sleep now. Catharsis.
And so the other story from memoirs that I wanted to talk to you about ties into this podcast and the reason why I decided to do this podcast. And the story is called The Dirty Little Secret Origin of Comics. So tell me about Major Malcolm Wheeler Nicholson. Tell me about your relationship to him, and tell me about the company that he formed.
Yeah, I mean, I'd always seen his name and thought, like, I wonder if there's some relation. And then it was finally meeting Nikki Wheeler Nicholson, and us going through like, oh, I actually am related. And he was in the Army, and he actually led a squadron of people of color, and very decorated. And then when he left, he started a comic book company, and it was, it's been a while since I've gone through all the history again, but basically,
In a nutshell, one of the first comic books to feature original art.
yeah. And the funny thing is that with that is, like, he was trying to do what other people were doing, but all the best what they were doing is they were reprinting the Sunday comics from the newspaper in comic book form, and he wanted to do that but couldn't because all the best ones had been licensed already. So he had to hire new people, and that's when he hired, to do Batman and Superman, but his printer was also his distributor, and they would print up 20,000 copies or 50,000 or 100,000. He would say, hey, run 20,000 copies. So, and then the guy would print up 100,000 copies, and then they would distribute it, and then he would be told, oh, we didn't really sell that many. And so the printer and distributor then was grifting all the money, or a lot of it. So he's like, I don't understand. It seems like these are selling really well, but he's like, no, they're not. But we'll keep going, and they'll pick up. And then it wasn't until then at some point, I mean, it's interesting because this is right when they'd put a kibosh on selling liquor. And so the mafia and those people then had to go from bootlegging, and they went into pornography, which is what the presses were printing in the daytime. um, and magazine, basically pornography, and then comic books, and they just saw money in it, and then they took over the whole operation and kicked him out, which then was DC Comics is what it was. That was the
Right.
beginning of DC
Right.
Comics.
So uh, the printing or the publishing company that he formed was National Allied Publications, which became National Periodicals. And one
Hmm.
of the last comics that were put out by National Allied Publications was Detective Comics, which of course was the first appearance of Batman. I think a
Yep.
little bit after he had been removed from the company, but essentially the comic that he had created, right? The publication that he had,
Yeah.
yeah. Um,
Yeah, that's
and
that's right. I mean, and it's something. It's such a dirty beginning that it's really been played down in terms of an origin story by DC Comics and everybody, because it's just. But yeah, comics were birthed out of mafia and pornography, um, and not being able to sell booze. and
and
and his storytelling too, like he was wanting to do these adventure stories, and he very much believed in right and wrong, and he had a and that's why these stories that were coming out, like the ones that worked, was like Batman, who's fighting for truth and justice, and Superman. That was So he was organizing and saying, these are the stories that I really want to promote and do, which is then ironic that it gets taken over by bootleggers. um,
so it, so the reason why this story struck such a chord with me is because we're going through a period where the most popular and profitable form of storytelling right now is actually superheroes in movies and TV shows. These huge corporations are mining the IP like they're blood diamonds. Do you know what I mean? Um, and a few years back, I read the Sean Ho book, Marvel Comics: The Untold Story, and I've
mhm.
always been pretty cynical. But even for as cynical as I thought I was, I guess I always looked back at those early years of Marvel Comics with rose tinted glasses, and or romanticized it in some way. And as it turns out, the industry has always been kind of slimy. It's always been
Yeah.
very, driven by marketers who didn't really care about the product, owned by various companies who didn't really respect the medium, and worked on by guys who, for one reason or another, ended up working in comics probably out of necessity and not necessarily because they loved it. And so signed very short-term contracts, work for hire contracts, even as they were creating these things that we now understand to be billion-dollar properties. Um,
Yeah.
um, so I just and that's essentially. I mean, I think you can hear it from my voice, and I think everyone can hear it from my voice. It sparked this kind of like righteous indignation in me. As somebody who really read comics, not really because I cared that much about what happens to Daredevil, like what's going to happen to Daredevil or Spider-Man or whatever next week, but it was because of the art, it was because of the writing, it was because of the creators, um,
Yeah.
and the creators really just became you know grist in the mill. Just as long as there was ballast to keep the machine moving, they would just move creators in and out. um, and so that's kind of why I wanted to do a podcast where we don't talk about Superman and Batman as if they're real people and as if these movies are documentaries. You know what I mean? Like talk about the creators, talk about the process, talk about their time working in the industry. Treat because those are the stories that I think are the most important. I think those are the stories that people need to hear. um,
So I've never understood about Stan Lee is like I sat on a panel with him once, and the guy sort of puts equal energy into selling, a refrigerator as a spaceship or something, like or a used car. He'll like he was pushing Stripperella when I was on the panel with him, um, and it was really weird because I think some of the Fantastic Four stuff that impacted me as a kid, it's like the pathos that he put into the Thing and Silver Surfer, and then like here's the coming of Galactus, where basically they're supposed to be fighting God. But some of the understanding that he had of the Thing and the anger and the frustration, or the heartache and the existentialism of the Silver Surfer, it's genuine, and it was really it's interesting. I think that was Stan Lee's writing that was doing a lot of it. It was just a really weird contrast to have that and be the guy that's pushing hard on Stripperella, which I cannot imagine a more perfect symbol of the absolute worst of all comics. But I mean, that's one reason why I liked, like the 90s, that explosion of underground comics is like, and one reason I like comics is that it's really open and available to people writing and drawing. And so you have, weird Robert Crumb stuff, Gilbert Shelton stuff, or what they were publishing in Mad Magazine, like all that, or Sherry Flanagan doing Trots and Bonnie and National Lampoon. I mean, like, this is just, it is so real and genuine, and it's not IP to be mined. It's a very personal, genuine story, and it to me, like, that is literature, and that it's so available to anybody to do. I really appreciate.
I mean, I'm turning into a bitter old man, but you've been working in the industry for a long time. Is it inherently exploitative, or are there still avenues for someone to create something that's personal and unique and find an audience? And like, is that element still there?
I don't know. I mean, I've managed to sabotage every sellout opportunity I've had, and so I think, I've had offers with Too Much Coffee Man where, it's like, I mean, even the animation thing where that could have been a cartoon, it's like all of a sudden it started being not funny, and I didn't like the direction it was going in, and I just couldn't work on it, and I should have, I guess, or um, yeah, I think absolutely. I mean, like, it just, if you're not gonna take the sellout opportunities, then it's a long, slow hustle. But yeah, I still put out a comic book and sell 10,000 of this, or a book, or like, um, and I'm doing what I want. So yeah, I did the Mueller Report, I did the Bible, I did, um, I'm working on some autobiographical stuff now, or the opera I liked a lot. That wasn't meant to be a moneymaker. Like, I mean, opera, give me a break. It's absurd. Um, yeah, so yeah, I think the short answer is yes. I mean, we still have photocopy machines, and now, like, I do up a book, and I can take it down to, if I want, I take it down the street to Minuteman or whatever copy shop, and they'll print up books for $1 each. I mean, it's amazingly cheap. And then computers, um, if you're starting to do a web comic and put that out, I don't see a revenue stream in it, but it's available to find an audience. So yeah, I think it's a golden age in a lot of ways still.
I mean, it's not to borrow too many cliches, but all the old paradigms were destroyed, right? And so it's kind of like the Wild West out there, where you know, people are figuring out new ways to get themselves to their audience, and the rise of the web comic and web comic artists is heartening to me. Honestly, one of the most fascinating things to me is this meme culture that has popped up, where people will take words and pictures to tell stories, and sequentially, you know what I mean, like
Yeah.
pairing 3 or 4 images together to tell a story sequentially with writing overlaid on them, which has been the
Mhm.
medium for the entirety of its existence. Like, people people rediscovered the comic book or the comic strip without realizing they had done it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, memes are full on comics, and it's completely democratic now, and in the small d, where anybody can do it, and that's kind of it's amazing time for that. Durf complained that it killed the editorial cartoons because all of a sudden anybody can be an editorial cartoonist and put, here's a picture of the Capitol, and then he put a little thing underneath it, and so he was sort of lamenting it. But yeah, and yeah, I mean, when I did Too Much Coffee Man #1, there were so many comics coming out. The month that I put that out, people were saying, "Do not put out a new comic." It was more comics had come out that month than any other month previous. Not in quantity, but in terms of different titles. Like, it was an explosion of black and whites, and they were saying that it was so competitive. And I sort of, what I've taken is like, it's always the worst time to do something, and so yeah, it's more difficult than ever to do a comic strip or comic book, but it's always difficult, and you always have to figure out an angle and way to do it.
So tell people what you're working on currently and when they can expect to see it.
Um, yeah, I did. I guess it's sort of like meme Too Much Coffee Man in a way. Like, my years of silent seething didn't have the result I'd hoped. So it's just these little one panel things. So that I'm starting to figure out, like, what do I want to do with that Too Much Coffee Man single panel stuff. But the longer form that I'm doing is I my dad was he had a commune in the 60s, and I want to talk about that, is sort of the opening up of this land and allowing all these people to live there, than me being a kid and seeing some of that, and sort of the idealism of the 60s and where that went. And then later, when I was in college, I rented a room. My buddies and I rented a house, and and we rented it from what turned out to be leader of the Black Panther Party. We didn't really know it at the time, but Huey Newton was my landlord for a bit then. So I want to talk about the Black Panthers and that sort of the idealism of that. And then when I was a kid, my mom took us to see Jim Jones, who so I have memories of Jim Jones, and then obviously before the Kool-Aid massacre. But so I'm tangentially related to these three idealistic, we want to change culture movements, and where each of those three things went and what happened. And so it's a little bit of a sprawling piece, but that's what I'm working on. And it came about with the death of my dad, and then sort of the shutting down of what was left of his commune. And so a little bit, to me, it's like what mainstream culture is, and then what counterculture is, and how those two things relate.
And when can people expect to see that?
Probably in about 5 years, 10 years. I don't know. I'm banging away on it. I have a rough draft, and I'm starting to do a second draft. Dark Horse is very sympathetic and indulgent of publishing my stuff, and so I've got that lined up. I like my editor a lot there. Um, I don't know if I'll wind up there or take it another place, but yeah, it'll probably be a few years, but I'm working on it, and I like it a lot. Oh, the one thing that I should push is what I've done in the interim. Let's see if I can. Is I did a comic for a Down syndrome group of COVID, talking about COVID. It's been a really positive thing to do an education comic and make it a fun little piece.
Tell me a little bit about the comic.
Um, the first one that I did was all about like washing your hands and protecting yourself from COVID, distancing, and making that fun with spaceships and stuff. And then the second one is about getting the vaccine and how the vaccine works and why we should vaccinate. So they're kind of toss-offs in terms of quick in and quick out. But to me, that really is it it's the same thing as the Bible and the Mueller. It's like comics to me are ultimately about education, and that's what I want to do with the counterculture one, with Black Panthers, Jim Jones, and Commune. Yeah, just like an education, like how do you teach something?
Cool. And is this publicly available? Like, how can people see this?
Yeah, I should put that up on my website, which is toomuchcoffeeman.com.
Cool. So before I let you go, if you'll indulge me, I'd like to tell you a story about a coffee
I love
mug,
it.
a very special coffee mug. This was a coffee mug that I had in college. This was a very serious coffee mug, and it's not an exaggeration to say that this was the greatest coffee mug I've ever owned in my life. If anybody remembers the old Geico commercials from about 20 years ago, where there's a comically oversized coffee mug, this was that kind of coffee mug, and this was a coffee mug that of course held coffee. It was a coffee mug that held soup, occasionally used to boil pasta in the microwave. This was a very loved coffee mug, and it signified that once it was in use, that serious work was about to be done. Now, unfortunately, as life transpires, the coffee mug was left with a girlfriend who became an ex-girlfriend, and uh, I was not in the country, and so was not able um, to reacquire the coffee mug. And you know, uh, for the last uh, almost going on 20 years, I've assumed that this coffee mug was gone and just lost, like, youth or innocence, or, giant size X-Men #1. Um, and just on a whim, I started Googling uh, to look for the coffee mug, Too Much Coffee Ban coffee mug. And it led me to an Etsy store where, to be fair, it's not the same coffee mug, but there are
Right. Yeah.
multiple Too Much Coffee Man coffee mugs on your Etsy store, on your Etsy page. Um, so besides the coffee mug, what else do you have on your Etsy page? What can people find when they go there?
My favorite thing to sell is the original art, which I try to put up at, about $100 a page. So I try to keep it real cheap and like that's my favorite. But old T-shirts, I still have Too Much Coffee Man T-shirts, and then all the books I try to um, put out there. And so just recently, I bought the back stock from Boom, and so I've got I Thought You'd Be Funnier, which is a collection of the New Yorker stuff. I've got a bunch of Too Much Coffee Man books up there. It's definitely not complete, but yeah, coffee mugs, T-shirts, some patches. I have the Camp Micro Penis patch, um, which is it's a good true story about uh, being at camp with a guy who had a micro penis, um, which is less dirty than it sounds, actually. Um, what else do I have on there? Yeah, just odds and ends.
And is that how you would prefer people to buy your books, straight from your Etsy
Yeah,
store?
if people buy something from the Etsy store, I usually try to throw in some stickers and I'll sign anything without it being a big deal. But I'm more than happy if people find something on eBay, that's fine. Amazon is fine. It really doesn't. I'm just always kind of amazed that people buy things at all of my stuff. So it just makes me happy that people want it. So yeah, oh, I want to buy it from you. No, it's get it from the library. I'm happy. Yeah, it's free then. Like do that. It's so wherever is great. Yeah.
So you mentioned your website. Uh, do you want to plug it again and tell people how to follow your
Sure.
work?
Um, yeah, the toomuchcoffeeman.com or tmcm.com is the short version of it. And then I've got an Etsy store. And then I just started putting up old t-shirt designs up on TeePublic. So I've got a bunch of comics there. And then Go Comics, I've been putting up new cartoons up on gocomics.com. And they're the ones actually that ran the panel in 2001 that I shared with Stan Lee. That was where I knew that he would take the podium and he was going to come in late so he could make an entrance. And so I sat down when they're filing in, like I sat myself down next to the podium because I wanted to sit next to Stan Lee, and I did. So I ended up like chatting with him for an hour at that weird panel as he sold stripperella to people.
Are you active on social media? Can people follow you on Twitter or anything like that?
Yeah, the Twitter stuff has been really fun. Yeah, what am I? I'm Much Coffee on Twitter, and then I've got a Instagram. I think I'm Much Coffee Man on Instagram as well. And yeah, they're both. Yeah, the Twitter's been a blast because somebody will make a joke, and then you can start this round robin riffing on it, and I put little gags and little ideas, and I'll just test sort of ideas on Twitter. But I've really liked it. I met one of the founders of Twitter. I was at a bar, and everybody was talking about Walden, and this is in Berkeley, um, and I was listening to this, and I was like, oh, I went to Walden, and they got sort of indignant. They're like, oh no, we're talking about the school Walden. We're not talking about the pond. And I was like, no, I went to Walden School because all their kids were at those Walden School because it's for 4th, 5th, and 6th graders. And I was like, no, I went there. And they're like, what? I was like, yeah, I grew up in like that was my school, was Walden. And they're like, oh. And so I'm chatting with them, and one of them, um, kind of a younger punk rocker guy, and we're talking about Gilman Project, and he's like, oh, I just bought a house by Gilman. I was like, man, that's some real estate nowadays. Like it used to be the train tracks, but like, what do you do? And oh, I do some philanthropy work and this and that. I was like, yeah, how do you make your money? And he got really embarrassed. He's like, oh, I helped start Twitter. Oh, okay. Yeah, you're a billionaire. Okay, that's good. But I like the gag aspect of Twitter. It's a fun, in quick, out quick, say something stupid, joke with your friends.
Twitter, Instagram, and I contacted you through the Facebook page, but I don't
Yep.
know if that's
Yeah. I've got two because I've got the cartoonist Shannon Wheeler, and so yeah, I've filled up on my personal one. So then I have the cartoonist one and then I have a Too Much Coffee Man page as well, and I try to post appropriately to each of the different three places. The personal one I'm sort of doing less and less with.
And are you still contributing to the New Yorker?
I took a break to do Mueller, and it's a lot of work to do the gags each week. I'm thinking about going back into it, but it's been about 8 months of a break. It's intense doing New Yorker stuff.
Why so? If you have time to tell me.
Yeah, absolutely. Because you really have to sit down and think and allow yourself into the space. And so they want generally 10 submissions a week. Um, and and they should be kind of zeitgeisty. And yeah, it's a it's a headspace. To me, like a good New Yorker cartoon is one that is very minimalist in what it is, but it's implying a narrative that leads up into it and then implies a narrative that follows it. So if you look at a successful single panel cartoon, it's extending an imaginary narrative in both directions, past and future. And your brain is having to spin these ideas. And so to craft that kind of puzzle, it takes a commitment, and then to do 10 of them to submit is pretty intense, and then to sell one out of the, every few weeks or something, it's a lot of work for the return. But I like it a lot. But I want to get these narratives. I want to dive in and get my. I liked doing the Mueller, and I really want to get into doing this autobio book about, well, Huey Newton and Black Panthers and Wheeler Ranch.
Very cool. Is there anything else you want to say, or anything else you want to tell people who are listening to this?
No, I think, man, it's about, yeah, um, it's been a fun ride. I've really, I probably would have been more successful if I had just stayed in a track and just done, Too Much Coffee Man and put out 300 issues and did a single arc or something. But I've really liked moving around and doing an opera and doing a Mueller Report and working on the Bible. And so to me, it's been a real, I feel really lucky to have been able to do these things, and I really like it. So
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing I was going to say is, there's no real way to prepare for a career where, you're studying architecture and then you're creating comics and then you write music for an opera. You know what I mean? Like it's an amazing range of skill sets that you've had, and amazing number of media that you've worked in.
it's just being absolutely ignorant. I did one of the little gags I did was, with great ignorance comes great confidence. And yeah, it's just I started that opera not knowing that it was going to be a lot of work. And same with New Yorker. It's like, oh, I'm just going to do this thing, and I didn't really think about how I was going to have to rethink the way I looked at the art form of comics. And I did. I had to really tear everything down and then rebuild it all. Um, and but it's good to be stupid in that way, I think.
Very cool. Thank you so much, Shannon.
I love it. Thank you.